back on the video record, 12:18 p.m.
How did Mostek get the information that there was suspicion of childhood sexual abuse that required such a report?
I don't believe it required a report. We reported it voluntarily.
Okay. You say we. Who is the we?
The Archdiocese.
Who in the Archdiocese is the we?
Well, I gave the information to Deacon Vomostek, and he reported it to the police.
What did you tell Vomostek?
Well, I talked with him at various times throughout that day of June 20th.
How many times?
2, 3, 4, 5.
Walk through what you told him in the order in which you told him and the events as they unfolded on that day of June 20th.
Well,
Yourself and Vomostek.
Just the two of us, or you want it, the entire chronology?
Okay. I'm going to walk you through that, but before I do, let's go back to the 19th.
Okay.
And on that day at 5:30, after you received the call from the person whom you refused to identify and refused to identify the contents of, and or any other details on the assertion of privilege, what did you do?
Okay, first of all, I didn't say it was a call.
Okay, well, let's
And I
just
didn't say it was
communication.
5:30.
You said approximately 5:30.
Right.
Okay, let me rephrase the question then.
Okay.
Directing your attention to June 19th, approximately 5:30.
Okay.
You received a communication that you're claiming a privilege,
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
Okay. What action, if any, did you take responsive after that?
I communicated to two of my colleagues, Father Kevin McDonough and Jennifer Hasselberger, that we may have a situation involving a charter offense by a priest who was in active ministry, and that we would likely need to report it immediately and remove the priest from his position.
And you communicate that to both Hasselberger and to McDonough?
Yes.
And by what? What was your only source of? What was the privileged communication your only source of information for having made the report to Hasselberger and McDonough?
Yes.
And a charter offense means sexual abuse of a minor by a priest, doesn't it?
That's one of the charter offenses, yes.
Well, in this case, that's the charter offense you're referring to, that you reported to Hasselberger and McDonough, correct? We have a charter offense. Correct?
I'm thinking about that a minute. Again, I don't want to get into the substance of the communication I had with my client, but when I said charter offense, my intent there was to communicate that it involved sexual abuse of a minor.
Right. In fact, you said the victim was a minor.
I don't know that I said that. I said a charter offense by an active priest or something like that, or priest in ministry.
You communicated to Hasselberger and or McDonough that it will need to be reported immediately, did you not?
Correct.
Did you document that June 19th communication?
I believe that it was by email, so there likely is an email that would document that.
I'm talking about the earlier one with the client.
No, I did not prepare a memorandum of that conversation.
Of any kind?
Of any kind.
No notes?
No, I did not take notes.
After you reported that there is a charter offense, that is the sexual abuse of a minor, in this case, it was by Waymire, correct?
I did not communicate the identity of the priest to Father McDonough or Jennifer Hasselberger at that time.
Why not?
I didn't think it was appropriate to do it by email at that point in time. I was simply inquiring of their availability in the morning so that we could take the steps necessary that we needed to take.
Why not appropriate by email? I mean, you have a charter offense, that is an adult priest suspected of abusing a minor. Isn't the identity of the priest, who is the possible offender, the most important thing to communicate?
No, I was simply determining their availability in the morning to work with me to deal with what we needed to do and decide what we needed to do.
So at that point in time, Hasselberger and McDonough are not informed by you that Waymire is the subject of.
Well, and that's correct. In part, that was covered by whatever privilege I had with the person who had communicated with me.
Did you tell Hasselberger and McDonough you couldn't tell them more because some kind of privilege you're asserting here today?
No, I simply put in an email, I believe, what I said.
Have you asserted with Kevin McDonough or Jennifer Hasselberger some kind of privilege, attorney-client privilege like you asserted with us here today?
No, that hasn't been necessary.
Why hasn't it been necessary with them?
Because I haven't shared with them the contents of the communication I had with the client.
Did you ever tell Hasselberger or McDonough the identity of the client?
The identity of the client?
Yes.
No.
That communicated to you?
No. I think, no, I did not.
As chancellor, are you allowed to represent priests?
Assuming there's not a conflict, yes.
So, you provided the email on the evening. What was the date of the email to Hasselberger?
June 19th, it was a Tuesday,
Okay.
2012.
And
There's been a lot of confusion, Council, and I'll point this out to you because it might be helpful. I think there's been a lot of confusion about the chronology here. I think in part, from what I understand, your client may be confused about the chronology. I know Father McDonough was wrong in his deposition about the chronology, and I believe the Archbishop is wrong about the chronology. I will tell you, I am certain of the chronology. So it was June 19th, it was a Tuesday.
okay, so first tell me, how is McDonough wrong about the chronology?
I think that Father McDonough used a date of June 21st as when it was reported to police or something like that. I'm not sure what it. There was a mistake in his deposition and in his testimony, I believe.
And how is the Archbishop wrong about his chronology?
Because I think the Archbishop used June 22nd or something like that in his deposition. Then, of course, there's the question of the date of the decree he signed.
First, let's get the date of the report. So, are you saying that they are wrong about the date of the report made?
I don't know. I don't recall what they testified. I can tell you that the report that I had Deacon Domostic make was made on June 20th.
And was McDonough involved in the conversation with Domostic before he made the report?
No.
Who else was involved besides you?
No one that I'm aware of.
Was the Archbishop consulted?
At some point, the Archbishop was informed, but I don't know if someone informed him of, or I shouldn't say that. I know the Archbishop was informed by me at some point in time. I don't know who might have informed him of what prior to the time I talked to the Archbishop.
When was the Archbishop informed and by whom?
I don't know that. I assume that on the 20th, Father Laird was in communication with the Archbishop at some time on either the 20th or the 21st, I talked to the Archbishop.
What did you tell the Archbishop?
That we either had or were reporting sexual abuse to the police.
And what was the source
by one of his priests.
What was the source of the information? Did you tell Archbishop Neinstedt the source of the information that caused you?
No.
Did you tell him that it was Waymeyer?
At some point, I would have communicated it was Father Waymeyer.
Well, would you withhold that information from him?
No, not at all.
So you told him you were reporting Waymeyer.
At some point, I would have told him it was Waymeyer.
Well, at your first conversation with him about this,
I don't
you
know
would
that
have told him it was Waymeyer,
I don't know
would
that
you?
I told him that in the first conversation.
Why would you withhold that?
I wouldn't have withheld it.
Well, then why do you say you might have?
Because he would have either already been aware of it, or I wasn't free to disclose it to him at the first conversation, because I'm not certain exactly when I had my first conversation with him about it.
Which is it?
I don't know. I don't recall.
Is this, I mean, why are you confused about something as important as making a report and when you made it? And
I'm not confused about when I made a report to the police.
Well, you're confused about what you told the Archbishop and when you told him.
Well, right.
Counsel, you're arguing with the
Yeah.
witness.
I don't recall
witness.
exactly what I needed to tell the Archbishop, because I don't recall what he already knew when I began talking with him.
Well, when you first talked to the Archbishop, what did you tell him?
Just confirming the fact that we had reported something, or were preparing to report something to the police.
Okay. Did he act surprised?
No, because I think he was already aware of what was unfolding.
Okay. And who made him aware?
I
that
don't know
pertained
that.
to Waymeyer?
I don't know that. I'm assuming that it was Father Laird, but I don't know that for certain.
Okay. And you testify that he was already aware because of the way he acted. So you could tell that he already had been informed.
Yeah. At some point in time on the 20th, he also had been reviewing, I assume, some decrees drafted by Jennifer Hasselberger.
Okay. Were you aware that she was drafting decrees for his signature? That was a decree for investigation, right?
I don't know that I was aware of the decree for investigation. There was a second decree that was going to impose restrictions on Waymeyer. I was aware of that decree.
Okay. Did you make any notes of the conversation with Archbishop Neinstedt?
No.
How many conversations did you have at around that time with him about the Waymeyer matter and whether it should be reported or had been?
I only recall one conversation with him,
And where were you when you had that?
I believe it was in his office.
And who else was there?
No one.
And what was the date of that?
Again, it was either the 20th or 21st, I don't know which.
Did he take notes?
Best of my knowledge, he would not have.
And it was evident to you that he already had been looking at or had already made a decree concerning Waymeyer?
Yes,
Okay.
that he, it was my assumption that he had already seen a decree, because there was the conversation about what we would need to do to remove the priest, and that my assumption was that he had already talked with Father Laird, more than likely, too.
And did you get any indication about him having any other source of information about Waymeyer other than from Father Laird?
No, I don't. No, I wasn't aware that he had information from anyone else.
Okay, so.
He didn't impart any information to me. I simply reported him where we were at. It was basically a status update on something that someone had already made him aware of.
Okay. And so tell us what you told him and then what he told you.
Again, I told him that we either were preparing to report it to the police, and we're waiting for an event to happen so we could do that, or that we had already reported to the police. And again, it depends on whether I talked to him on the 20th or 21st.
What was the event you're waiting to have happen?
Greta Sawyer was going to have a meeting on the afternoon of the 20th with the victim's mother.
Why would you and the Archbishop wait for such an interview with the victim and or the mother before a report would be made?
Because we had no non-privileged information that would allow us to report until we got the information from the mother to allow us to report.
The Archbishop's not a lawyer. He doesn't have a privilege.
Right, but I was bringing the information, and it was in a privileged fashion.
Laird doesn't have a privilege. He's not a lawyer, right?
Right. Oh, he actually is a lawyer.
But
I don't know if he's admitted to practice, but he's a trained lawyer.
okay, but he wasn't operating as a lawyer in his capacity as the Vicar General.
Correct.
He was operating as the Vicar General and a mandated reporter, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Who made the decision to interview the mother and the victim before the law enforcement were to be notified?
I don't know that.
How did you find out about that decision?
The decision to interview the mom?
And the victim, the kid.
Okay, I never learned that the kid was going to be interviewed.
Okay. Then the mom.
I learned that Greta Sawyer was meeting with the mom the afternoon of June 20th.
Have you seen any notes or recordings of Greta Sawyer's interview?
I have not.
Do you believe that she conducted such an interview?
I know she met with the mother, that's all I know.
Okay. And
Well,
what were you told?
excuse me, I know some of the substance of that meeting, but all I know is she met with the mother. Was not aware that she met with the child as well.
What were you told about that?
About what?
Greta Sawyer's meeting with the mother.
I just knew that Greta was meeting with the mother.
You said you knew something about the substance of it. What did you know?
Oh, I mean, what substance did I learn?
Yes.
That the mother was agreeable that we could report Father Waymeyer to the police as having abused her child.
What communications on June 19th and 20th, and at the time you talked to, did you learn that the mother had reported to John Paul Erickson?
I can't answer that.
Why not?
As I told you, I received a privileged communication on the evening of the 19th. I alerted Father McDonough and Jennifer Hasselberger. On the morning of the 20th, I contacted Greta Sawyer and said, are you meeting with somebody to talk about matters that pertain to abuse? And she said, yes. And I said, we need to report that, and if you can get the mother to allow us to report it to the police, we can do that immediately. And that's what Greta did. She met with the mother. I didn't know the woman's identity, but Greta got the green light for us to report it, which permitted me then to go back to Father or Deacon Vomastek and say, call the police.
And do you, to this day, know what Vomastek actually reported to law enforcement the first time contact was made?
I know he left a voicemail message for Commander Axel. I don't know that I know the substance of that, and then I believe I've seen an email exchange later that evening with providing him with the email that I've seen was redacted, so I don't know what. I never got a copy of that email.
You said you had 5 or more conversations with Vomastek. So many.
No, I said 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not sure exactly how many. Well, first of all, because the privileged nature, I knew we wanted to to find a means to report it, because I couldn't report it based upon the privileged communication. And so when I learned that Greta was meeting with the mother, I thought this is the way we can get it reported if Greta can get the mom's permission to report it. Because it was my understanding that the mom was reporting it to someone, according to Greta, that was in a pastoral relationship. So I said, well, will she allow us to report it? And I also said, secondly, the priest likely will need to be removed from the parish. Is that going to create some problems for her if we remove the priest from the parish right away?
Are you certain that Greta Sawyer met with the mother on June 20th rather than on June 19th?
Yes.
What
Now,
makes you
wait,
certain of that?
Well, I'm not saying there was not a meeting on the 19th. There could have been a meeting on the 19th that I don't know about. But I know that I talked with Greta Sawyer on the morning of the 20th. She said that she had a meeting, and I believe it was 3 o'clock that afternoon. I then gave Greta the instructions I just described about getting mom's permission to report this to the police. I later conferred with Greta Sawyer, and she confirmed that mom gave us the green light to report it to the police, so I had Deacon Vomastik call the police.
How many meetings were there between Sawyer and the mother?
I don't know that. I believe that Greta had been talking to the mother earlier about a matter that was unrelated, well, I shouldn't say unrelated, that involved some problem between her children, some interfamilial problem, and so I believe the mom had been talking to Greta about that. But I don't know what meetings Greta had prior to the one on the 20th. I learned from Greta on the morning of the 20th that she was meeting with the mom that afternoon.
Is Jennifer Hasselberger a mandated reporter as you understand the law?
No.
You're not a mandated reporter as you understand the law?
Correct.
Kevin McDonough is a mandated reporter?
He can be a mandated reporter if he receives information that's not privileged.
Not received in the priest penitent.
Right.
Okay. Archbishop Neinstadt mandated reported?
With the same condition if it's non-privileged.
Laird, a mandated reporter?
Again, if it's non-privileged.
Erickson, a mandated reporter?
As a cleric, he would be a mandated reporter if he received information in a non-privileged setting.
Should we take a lunch break?
Off the video record. Back on the video record, 1:30 p.m.
All right, we're back on Waymire, and when I looked at some documents, there were some emails between you and Jennifer Hasselberger on June 19th, right?
Well, one could say that about just about every day with Jennifer Hasselberger.
Concerning the Waymire situation.
Again, as I described, on the evening of the 19th, I believe I sent her an email that said we had a possible charter offense by an active priest, and we'd have to report it and remove the priest.
And then on the 20th is when you said you had the conversations with Vomastik, right?
Correct.
And on the 20th, why don't you walk us through what you did on the 20th, responsive to the Waymire situation and what needed to be done.
Okay, on the 20th, I talked with Greta Sawyer and learned that she was going to be talking with the mother. And so my feeling was that would allow us to report it to the police if the mother was willing to allow that. So I urged Greta to get the mother's consent to that.
What made you think it hadn't already been given by the mother? The mother reports that she had made a report.
I had no information about that. I've seen subsequent news reports saying that she was advised to report it to the police, but I had no information suggesting it had been reported to the police, with this exception. When I talked with Greta on the 20th, the impression I got was that the mom had been talking with Greta or somebody, I don't know for certain who, about one child being involved with another child. And I understood that Greta had helped the mom do something about that, report it to the neighborhood house or some agency that was going to help them. So Greta kind of gave me some quick background, which wasn't necessarily relevant to what I was dealing with, but apparently that was part of the trigger that resulted in Mom learning that her son had been abused by Waymire. So when Greta gave me the information about the earlier incident and that she was going to be talking with Mom, and I said, well, is Mom going to identify some abuse? I want to get Mom's permission to report that, and also talk to Mom saying we're going to have to move Father Waymire out of the parish more than likely, and will that create some problems for her?
Just a moment. Greta already knew there had been abuse before she interviewed the mom.
I don't know. No,
Well,
she knew that she knew there was something between the two children, but she hadn't talked to the mom the way Greta was telling me about any abuse by Waymire.
Okay, so
I asked Greta then, when are you meeting this afternoon? So I told Greta what I wanted her to get from the mom. I said, let me know once you've had that meeting so we can report it to the police if Mom's willing to allow to do that. So following that, then I talked with Deacon Vomastek because I wanted to make sure that we got it reported to somebody in the police department who would do something with it rather than just clear it without taking any action. And Deacon Vomastek at one point in time had been on the sex crimes unit, and I said, so who can we get this to? So he said, I've got the guy. I said, can you give him a heads up that we might be reporting this? So my understanding was Deacon Vomastek that late that morning was going to call somebody to let them know that if we got the green light, we were going to get them that information as soon as we could.
So did you tell Vomastek that you had a mandatory report of sexual abuse?
No.
That needed to be made?
No, because at that point in time, there was no mandatory report of abuse that needed to be made. Everything was privileged. So then that afternoon, after Greta met with the mom and gave us the green light to report it, I then went back to Vomastek late that afternoon, right before 5 o'clock, and said, make the call. Here's the information, make the call. And he made the call. And then it's my understanding, although
and he reported what?
I don't know. He left information for this. I think it was Commander Axel. I don't know exactly what information he provided to them.
So is it your belief that an actual report of abuse identifying the offender and the necessary information had been made on that date by Vomastek?
Well, he reported information, whatever he had, that I had given him, and that he was already familiar, apparently, with the earlier situation involving the children. I don't know how Deacon Vomastek was aware.
I'm talking about the abuse of the kid now.
No, I know that. But it's a necessary prerequisite to that, because apparently sometime earlier, Vomastek had been in touch with the same watch commander about the involvement of the two children. He had talked to the commander about that in some fashion.
Okay, listen to this question now. Listen to this question. Is it your belief that Vomastek made the report as required by law on the 20th?
Is it my belief that he made that report?
Yes.
Yes.
And what information did he report on that date that makes you believe it was made?
I believe he provided the name of the priest and the name of the mother.
On the 20th?
Yes.
And he got that information from whom?
And that's what I was just trying to explain.
No. Who did he get that information?
Well, part of it he got from me, but part of it he already knew.
Okay. Then my question is, what did you tell Vomastek?
That the mother was claiming that Father Waymire had abused one of her children.
Okay. And where did you get that information?
Greta.
You had been involved in the Montero situation before, and you were aware that in the case of Montero, McDonough has specifically talked to the police about contacting the offender, Montero, before the police investigation. Were you aware of that?
I'm not sure that I'm following the question.
Okay, never mind.
Okay.
Going back to the 20th then.
As far as I know, Father McDonough never talked to Montero before he talked to the police after he...
Well, we'll go back
Okay,
there. Okay. I digressed for a minute. Okay, so Vomastek makes the report, as you understand it, based on information you gave him, and what was the other source of the information that
He
based it
had
on?
some knowledge from someplace before about the two kids, so he knew the mother. He knew who she was or something.
I'm just trying to get from you, besides you being the source of the information, who else is the source of the information upon which Vomastek is now making a report you believe was made on the 20th?
Well, as to the allegation against Waymeyer, he was only getting that part of it from me, but he was already aware of something involving that family and the two children.
Okay.
I don't know where he got that.
Okay. So as far as you know as to Waymeyer, he had no other information source other than you?
Correct.
Okay. So, what happened on the 20th then?
He made the call. I then informed...
Were you there when he made the call?
Yeah, but I wasn't. I wasn't necessarily listening to him. I was around his office.
Did he actually tell somebody that he had to make a report as mandated, and Waymeyer was the offender, and he had credible information?
As I said, I had asked him to give the police a heads up earlier that we'd be making this report. So when he called, I think he said, "I'm calling about the matter we discussed before. I left a message for you before," something along those lines.
So he actually talked to the investigator?
I don't know that. I may have been leaving a voicemail message. I'm not certain of that. I think he had the commander's cell phone number.
And you were present when he was...
Well, I was around, but I wasn't just standing there listening to every word he was saying.
Who else was engaged in the decision and the conversation that he had with the police besides yourself?
Just me.
Okay.
I mean, I had informed Father Laird that we would be making that report as soon as we got the green light from Greta.
And had Hesselberger and McDonough been told also that this was going to be happening?
They knew that as soon as we got the okay from Greta, that the mom had given her the okay, that we would be reporting it.
Were you in any direct contact with Hesselberger at that time?
Yeah, her office is just right near mine.
Was she urging a report to be made before it was actually made?
At some point, she questioned when we needed to make a report, or if there was a deadline. And I said something about I can't remember how I responded to it.
You said I can wait, didn't you?
You what?
You said I can wait.
Well, I think she was asking whether we needed to make it on the 19th or 20th, and I said tomorrow was fine or something like that.
So on the 20th, any other interactions pertaining to the Vomastek making the report and your involvement in this?
Once I knew Vomastek had made the report, I think I then sent an email, probably just to Father McDonough, although it's possible that I could have copied Jennifer Hasselberger as well. But I informed Father McDonough that the matter had been reported to the police and that we would need to remove Father Waymeyer the following day, and would he be available to do that. I mean, there was other interactions during that day because we were meeting with Father Laird and letting him know what we were doing, and Jennifer, I think, was preparing some decrees. So there was other things happening that day as I was waiting for Greta to have this meeting to allow us to report it.
Were you the one making decisions on behalf of the Archbishop in connection with this?
Well, I can't say that I was making the decisions. I was informing Father Laird beginning on the evening of the 19th what I was doing, and we got no indication from him that he wanted me to do anything different than what I was doing.
You put a litigation hold on this matter on June 21st, didn't you?
I don't know that. I'm not certain that. Is there a document or some source for that?
Yes.
What?
there's a document that said Andy is going to issue a litigation hold for Father Curtis Waymeyer personnel file.
Is going to?
Yes,
So that means I hadn't yet done it.
that's right.
Okay.
Why would you be putting a litigation hold? Isn't there? Why would you be doing that? It says it cannot be destroyed. Why would you be issuing an order not to destroy documents?
We would, first of all, never destroy documents.
Well, then why would you be issuing an order not to do it if you
Counsel,
were concerned
I
someone
haven't
had to do
seen
it?
an order that I issued saying there's a litigation hold and don't destroy documents. I haven't seen that. So if you can show me that, I'll review it. But I don't recall issuing any kind of litigation hold regarding Father Waymeyer at any point in time. Now, litigation
Did you
holds
tell
are-
anybody that?
I don't recall that, no.
Okay.
In fact, Jennifer Hasselberger is the one that typically would discuss our need to do litigation holds. So if there's an email or something to our archivist to,
I'm just asking if you issued a
I don't
litigation
recall.
hold.
I don't think I put a litigation hold on anything.
Did you deny issuing a litigation hold?
Well, since I don't recall it, I'm going to deny it, yes, until presented with a document to the contrary, and then I'll reevaluate my response.
Do you recall issuing any instruction to not destroy documents?
No, we didn't have to issue such an instruction because we don't destroy documents.
Do you recall suggesting that the matter be kept quiet?
No, I would not have. We were going to remove the pastor and announce it to the parish, and that's exactly what we did. I went out with Father Laird, met with the trustees. We removed the pastor and made an announcement that weekend.
McDonough went out and met with Waymeyer before the police officers could do that. Why was that permitted?
Jennifer Hasselberger drafted the decrees and indicated that they needed to be served on Father Waymeyer when he was removed.
Did you, knowing what you know as the chancellor and having worked in this area as long as you had, did you say, no, don't go out there and interview Waymeyer and tip him off before the police can get out there and interview him, seize the evidence, and do what they have to do?
He didn't go out there to interview him. He went out there to serve a decree removing him as pastor.
Well, that's what you call it, but he went out there and interviewed him, didn't he?
No, I don't think he did. That wasn't his testimony in his deposition, the way I read it.
He said he and Mostak went out there and talked to him for an hour and told him the police were coming.
Well, they served
Testified
it.
to what he testified. I don't think
They
he said he talked with
served a
him for an hour.
decree on
He was
him
there
and
an hour.
apparently seized his gun and a computer.
Yeah. So why was he directed to have seized his gun before the police could get there?
I don't know anything about why they obtained the gun from him.
Why was he directed to have seized a computer before the police could get there?
And again, I think Jennifer Hasselberger was the one that said, get his computer. So you'll have to ask her that.
Well, there's some records that indicate the Archbishop had directed Father McDonough to get the gun, and what do you know about that?
Nothing. I had no knowledge of any directives from the Archbishop about Waymeyer through that entire period of time.
Well, you had a meeting with Jennifer Hasselberger, Kevin McDonough, yourself. I think, who else was in attendance at that meeting before McDonough went out there?
There was a variety of us meeting all during the 20th and again on the 21st regarding these matters. I don't think Father McDonough was there on the 20th, but he was there on the 21st because he's the one that went with Father Deacon Vomostek to serve the decree on Father Waymeyer.
Right. So he indicated that there was a meeting. You were in attendance.
On the 21st.
Well, there was a meeting in attendance before he went out there. And did you, knowing that he was going to go out there for whatever purpose, before the police could, say, hey, don't do that? That's getting in the way of a police investigation?
Just the opposite, Counsel. We had informed the police that we were going to remove him, and it's my understanding that Deacon Vomostek called the police as they were going out there. So the police were given a heads up beginning the evening of the 20th and again the 21st.
So what did Vomostek tell the police as they were going out there?
Well, I don't know exactly what he told him because I wasn't there.
Well,
But
then
he
why do you
called the police.
Why do you make such an assertion if you weren't there and you can't testify to that?
Because he told me he called the police on his way to serve the decree on Waymire. And there's also an email trail from the evening of the 20th where Vomostic is emailing back and forth with Commander Axel. In one of those emails, Vomostic's telling Axel, we're removing the priest tomorrow.
Okay. You're pretty much in charge of, on behalf of the Archbishop, and dealing with a lot of this, and you've been around this stuff a long time. As far as you're concerned, it's appropriate for the Archdiocese personnel to have interviewed the victim and or the victim's mother before the police did? Is that your view?
It was not my knowledge that the victim was going to be interviewed. I had no knowledge whatsoever that the victim was going to be interviewed.
What about the victim's mother?
And again, my understanding was all we were going to get from her was permission to report it to the police.
Okay. You also did know that McDonough and Vomostic is a deacon working for the Archdiocese, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We're going to see Waymire before the police could, correct?
I wouldn't agree that before the police could. The police had that information for over 12 hours.
You know that they had not interviewed Waymire before McDonough went there, though.
I didn't know that, but that was one, again, Vomostic was going to call them on the way out there.
Well, you're just telling me that they had already had it for 12 hours. Now you're saying that Vomostic called them on the way there.
But he had also communicated with them the evening before. But what I'm saying is the matter was reported to the police approximately 5 p.m. on the evening of the 20th. Now it's sometime mid-morning on the 21st. They were going out there. Vomostic again calls the police and says, we're going out there.
Are you telling the Archbishop what's going on?
No, not all those details.
What are you telling him?
Well, I simply, as I said earlier, informed him, gave him a status update at some point in time.
Did he give the go-ahead to allow McDonough to go out there and interview and serve the decree before the police could?
I don't know that he.
The state's testimony.
I don't know that he knew what the sequence would be. He obviously had signed the 2 decrees prior to that time, because one was a decree removing Waymire and the other one was a decree imposing certain limitations.
Well, one was a decree ordering an internal investigation.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
That means internal Archdiocese, right?
Well,
to be shared with the Archdiocese only, right?
No.
That's what internal is, inside, right?
He had pointed, for canonical purposes, he had appointed Father Laird to be the investigator.
Okay.
That's not just for the inside. That's misstating what the canonical steps are involved in something like this. And again, Jennifer Hasselberger is the one that prepared the decree pursuant to canon law. She's the canon law advisor, not me.
Well, you don't share it with anybody from the outside. It's internal, isn't it? It's inside.
Is what internal?
The investigation.
Well, we didn't know what was going to be investigated at that point because we didn't know what the police were going to do.
So, why was the gun taken?
I don't know. I wasn't involved in the question about
When they
the
came
gun.
back, they brought the gun back and the computer and turned it over to you, didn't they?
Not the gun, the computer they did.
What'd you
Well,
do
actually,
with
they put them both in the vault.
And you had something to do with that, so.
Something to do with what?
The gun and the computer.
I never saw the gun. I never had anything to do with the gun. They put that in the vault along with the computer, and then a day or two later, Officer Gillette came to get the computer. To get the computer.
Why did they take the computer?
I don't know. Jennifer Hasselberg apparently instructed him to get to his computer.
And why do you put that on her?
Because it wasn't my recommendation.
Okay, well then why do you pick her out? Why do you select her as the one who made that decision?
She was part of the discussion, and she said, get his computer.
Did you hear her say that?
Yeah.
To whom?
McDonough and Vomostic.
When?
Well, it had to be the 21st.
Where was that?
Well, it was somewhere within the Chancery offices. I mean, our discussions were somewhat fluid between my office, Father Laird's office, and Jennifer Hasselberger's office.
Who was present when you make the assertion that she ordered that the computer be seized by Kevin McDonough?
I don't know where we were.
Who else was present when you claim she made that order?
I don't know who else was present. I know I didn't make the instruction, and I know that they took the computer, and she said, get the computer.
When the computer was taken by McDonough and brought back to the Chancery, it was turned over to you in your chain of custody, so to speak, right?
It was put in the vault, and I was aware that the gun and the computer were put in the vault.
Did you look at the computer?
No. The only thing I looked at the computer was when Officer Gillette came to pick it up. I think I prepared a receipt that probably identified it as a X brand computer, maybe serial number, model number, something like that. I didn't open the computer up. I didn't turn it on. I believe it was a laptop computer. I certainly didn't look at anything on the computer. I physically looked at a closed laptop computer, turned it over to the police officer.
When you heard, as you claimed, Jennifer Hasselberger ordered the computer be seized, as a lawyer and as a chancellor, didn't you say, hey, wait a minute, that's not our job?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
I didn't.
Why didn't you see it that way?
I didn't even dawn on me she was saying, get his computer.
Okay. When did you tell the police that you had the computer?
I don't know how the police learned that we had the computer. All I know is that within a day or two, they came to get the computer.
In fact, it was not volunteered by you that you had taken possession of the computer to police, correct?
Well, I certainly didn't call the police, no.
Why not? Were you concealing it?
No, not at all.
Did you, at the time you gave him the computer, did you give him the Waymeyer's file?
No.
Why not?
Nobody asked for the word Waymeyer's file.
Well, you knew that there was information in Waymeyer's file that could be helpful to a police investigation.
I didn't necessarily know that, no.
And you reviewed that file.
Well, I had some 3 years ago, earlier, yes.
Didn't you think that would be valuable to the police in investigating a crime that had already been reported against a minor by Waymeyer?
I was prepared to cooperate with the police and provide them with whatever information they want, but they weren't asking me for a file. They weren't asking me for anything other than a computer.
Fact is, you or no official from the Archdiocese had ever turned over a file to the police or volunteered to do so, correct?
Oh, well, I just think I told you earlier today we turned a file over involving Father Wenthy to the police.
Yeah, that's because the police demanded it.
Well, they came in and sought the police. I don't know that demanded is the right word. They came in and asked for us to provide them with Wenthy's file.
Okay. Right, this is documented, isn't it? This meeting. Right, okay. Hang on, sir. What did you know about Waymeyer's camper and how he had used it to access the kids?
I knew nothing about that prior to his arrest. I knew he had a camper. On the 20th, somehow, and I don't know how, I learned that he was out of town. I think that somebody had communicated with the parish and learned that Father Waymeyer was out of town, he had his camper with him, and would not be returning until the 21st. That's all I knew about a camper.
There's, on June 21st, an email where Hasselberger sends an email to you. It says, quote, "How did it go?" Do you recall that?
What time's the email?
8:33 p.m.
Then it'd be pure speculation. I'd have to maybe look at the context or my response, but I'm guessing she was asking about the removal of Waymire.
It says, I assume the trailer was gone.
I don't know.
Question mark, question mark. What do you know about that?
Nothing.
When you're sending emails to her at that time, is that from your office in the Chancery?
At what time?
8:33, June 21st.
I thought this was an email from her to me.
Oh, okay, when you're receiving it then.
Oh, it could be either in the office or on my phone.
Okay. So you're receiving it on your smartphone or at the office?
Correct.
Do you have one at another computer at your house or any other computer that you use at the office besides the one in your office?
Not for purpose. Well, okay. Let me explain that perhaps. I have a computer in my at the time. If you're talking about June of 2012, I had
Yes.
a computer in my office. I had an iPhone that would sync with that computer. So any message that was sent to my email address would be on both, and any message that I sent out from either one would be on both. I also had a computer at home that would allow me to go in remotely and access my office in my email account, but those emails would again stay on that Archdiocesan account. It wouldn't be on a personal email account in my home computer,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. On January 29th, 2014, it appears that Joe Kippers is forwarding an email chain concerning this stuff kind of after the fact. Do you know, setting forth a timeline, do you know anything about that?
Setting forth a timeline?
Yeah, of various events that we've been talking about.
I know that there was some question at some point in time about the police investigation and what the timeline was in terms of our reporting it to the police.
Have the police interviewed you concerning your knowledge of these events?
No, they've never asked.
Have you ever volunteered to speak with them, knowing that there's an ongoing investigation that you may have knowledge?
I haven't.
Why not?
I assumed if they wanted to speak with me, they'd speak with me.
Don't you want them to know what happened and whether or not crimes occurred here?
Well,
and be helpful with the investigation?
the priest pled guilty, so it made the question of his guilt or innocence moot. So at that point in time, I don't understand.
Well, you're aware there's an investigation of the Archdiocesan officials and their role in the Waymire matter, as well as others, are you not?
Right, and I'm also aware of the fact that apparently the police or the county attorney chose not to prosecute that.
Well, are you also aware that the county attorney reopened that investigation?
Well, I've seen reports of that. I don't know that for certain.
Well, you're basing it on reports they closed it, so you must.
Well, I saw the county attorney on television saying he closed it, but I didn't see him on the television saying he reopened it.
So then, how do you know he reopened it then?
Because from what I've read in the newspaper, I've learned that it's been reopened.
So it's from the media. You rely on in both instances, right? That they closed
yes,
it and reopened it.
One was the official county attorney saying we closed it. The other one was a news report saying the county attorney's office has reopened it.
Mr. Eisenzimmer, why haven't you chosen to bring information in your possession to law enforcement? Why have you made that choice?
I don't know that I have made that choice. I just simply haven't done it.
Don't you think you're possessed of information that could be helpful to an investigation?
Not that's non-privileged.
Are you concerned that you could be implicated in a failure to report, in an obstruction of justice, or an interference with law enforcement?
I'm not. I've told you here today what happened. We reported it.
The Archbishop impaneled a task force, given public pressure and the like recently, and I think Father Witt was kind of the point on that, and had a number of people interviewed. Did you get interviewed for that task force?
I did. Report reflects that.
Okay. And who interviewed you?
Brian Short,
Okay. And on one occasion or more than one?
single occasion.
Okay. And how long have you known Brian?
Well, I think I met him years ago, but I don't know him. He might have, I'm not, yeah, I think he mediated a case I was involved in once years and years and years ago.
We've referred to the Waymeyer file. I want to ask you some questions about the file protocols as you understand them to be, and how they are to be stored. Is it correct to say that there is an upstairs file, which is on the main level of the chancery, called is also known as a vault with a lock on it?
Okay, first of all, there is a vault with a lock on it,
Okay.
okay?
And where is that?
Well, it's in the chancery complexes, backed by some of the staff cubicles.
And who has access to that combination?
The combination,
Or the lock? Unlock it.
the two chancellors, the people in the Records and Archives office, and I suspect that if they needed to get it, the Archbishop and the Vicar General would have the combination too.
And that file, what files are contained in that vault?
Just about all of the active files of the Archdiocese. So if you want me to give you a
No,
narrative of
I just
those.
need to know, that would be the personnel files of the priest, right?
That would be one of the categories of files, but not the only category of files in the vault.
There's also a file cabinet in the Vicar General's office, is there not?
At what point in time are you talking about?
Well, at the point in time which you're chancellor, let's go with that one.
Well, there was some files, not in the Vicar General's office, but in his administrative assistant's office,
Judy Delaney?
Judy Delaney. It was actually a shared, one cubicle that had two workstations in it, and it was in that cubicle. It's not an office, it's a cubicle. And that was true during the period of time that Father McDonough was the Vicar General.
Okay. And that contained complaints of inappropriate conduct?
It
Against
contained,
priests?
excuse me, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
That contained complaints of inappropriate conduct against priests?
No, well, some of them would have, sure.
And who had access to that?
Well, the same people that would have access to the vault files had access to those files as well. But
Chancellors, Archbishop, yourself, who else?
archive and record staff, Director of Clergy Services, Vicar General, Archbishop. If anybody from the Comprehensive Assignment Board would need it, they would have access to that.
Is there also an archive in the basement that contains a file pertaining to dead priests and priests no longer active in the Archdiocese?
Correct. As I said, the vault contains active files. Once the priest is inactive through death, or if they're not a priest of this diocese and they've moved, or if they're an order priest that's moved, the files then are marked inactive and moved to the storage in the basement.
And then there's also a secret archive in the basement, which is a small room with a safe in it?
It's a large room with a small safe.
Okay. And what's contained in it?
Nothing.
Are there other files that pertain to or have information pertaining to potential sexual misconduct by priests, specifically sexual abuse of minors, that we haven't identified by location or description?
Well, let me see if I can clarify and help you out there. Each priest, there's a file on each priest. Now, where that file is depends on what's going on. So they're either in the vault, or for some period of time, some priests that had any kind of disciplinary issue, and it could be sexual abuse of minors, it could be sexual involvement with consenting adults, it could be chemical dependency, whatever the issue was. Some of those were kept in that area I described. It was in Junie Delaney's workstation. But any of those files, if they became active through death or something, then they would be moved downstairs, because it would then be more of an archival status as opposed to an active file. Does that help?
I think so. Are there any other other locations where files pertaining to priests would be located who are either accused or engaged in sexual misconduct?
Well, just temporarily. If, for example, this afternoon, as I was working as chancellor, I received some report and I was preparing a memorandum, that might be kept in my office for a period of time till I could move it into the priest file, but eventually everything should end up in the priest file, was the process.
Does Archbishop Neinstedt keep any of his own files?
Not to my knowledge.
Did Archbishop Flynn?
Not to my knowledge. Well, Archbishop Flynn did keep files on his own personal affairs.
But I'm talking about in the sexual abuse
Oh,
stuff.
no, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
Back on the video record, 2:09 p.m.
And let me also clarify, Mr. Anderson. I'm sorry. Let me also clarify, Mr. Anderson, that within the chancery there'd also be some other miscellaneous files that would pertain to priests. For example, there'd be like a file relating to their pension. There might be a file that was in the office of the Director of Clergy Services for some reason, for some period. But anything relating to disciplinary matters should end up in the priest file.
There's you made reference to the Comprehensive Assignment Board. What is that, and what files do they keep, and where are they?
Again, I don't know necessarily what files they would keep, but if something would exist that they would produce, it would end up in the priest file, I presume. The Comprehensive Assignment Board was a group of people, mostly priests, I believe, who would be available to the Archbishop to advise him on assignments of priests. So sometimes the Archbishop would utilize this group to help him make a decision relative to assignment of a priest. I was never in the meeting, so I don't know, what kind of things they produced.
What about the Priest Personnel Board? How does that differ from the Comprehensive Assignment Board?
Really just a difference in terminology. I think earlier they referred to the Clergy Assignment Board, later on it was Comprehensive Assignment Board.
Okay, that's
Same group.
Okay, that's what it sounded like. Okay. Have you ever seen minutes or records from the Priest Personnel Board, formerly now the Comprehensive Assignment Board?
I have not, no. I had no involvement with that process whatsoever. As I indicated earlier, my counsel or advice relative to assignment of the priest was never sought in any way, shape, or form in my work as chancellor.
Well, you'll recall just from the Adamson cases alone, the bishops used to use the Priest Personnel Board
Right.
For making assignments and getting guidance, and they kept minutes and records like that. Do you know if that's
and
still
they may
being
well
done?
have minutes. I've never seen any that I can recall.
Okay.
Typically what would happen is when the Archbishop was ready to make an assignment, Jennifer Hasselberger, during the time she was there before her sister Dominica Brennan, would prepare in essence a decree simply saying that this priest is being assigned there, but that wasn't those weren't minutes. That's the only documents that I ever saw that came as a result of that process. But the fact that there was a decree doesn't necessarily mean that they went through the CAB, as we called it, CAB.
Did you ever become aware of discussions between Archbishop Neinstedt and Father McDonough about not making certain, creating certain records so that they could avoid being discovered?
The only time I've ever seen that was in the Archbishop's deposition testimony. I have no idea where that comes from. There's never been a discussion of that nature, and it should be rather obvious from the files that people put everything in writing and never destroyed it.
Well, you and I would disagree on that because that's not obvious. But that's not a question.
Yeah,
But
I never heard any discussion like that whatsoever. Both of them had been involved in litigation. Kevin McDonough here, and I think he described that in his deposition. Archbishop Neinstead was involved in litigation both here as well as in New Ulm. They knew that documents were discoverable, so I'm astonished that the Archbishop described a conversation like that with Father McDonough.
Well, knowing they'd be discoverable and knowing that there might be certain things you don't want discovered, you wouldn't put it in writing if that was your intent, right?
I suppose. I'm not aware of anybody who ever was hesitant to put something in writing.
Father McDonough referred to disciplinary files in his deposition. Do you know what he's referring to? Disciplinary files?
I don't. Again, sometimes when you were dealing with something, you might, have a working file. I mean, some of the priest files were rather voluminous. So if you were working on something, you might start, keeping this document, writing that memo or whatever, and keep them in there till they got into the priest file. But there was not a file known as a disciplinary file that were kept separate from the priest file. I think what he's simply referring to is a priest file that was kept in a separate cabinet because it was a priest involved in some disciplinary issue. So I think he's referring there to the files of Judy Delaney that were in Judy Delaney's office.
There's also reference to, quote, restricted files, unquote.
Same files. Those are the files. Restricted was a common term. Those files were the ones that were kept in Judy Delaney's workspace. So if you went into the vault and you looked for a file on Father X, if his file was one of the restricted disciplinary files, there would be a notation in the vault saying that that file is in the Vicar General's office. So if you needed that file and you went in the vault and it wasn't there, there'd be a notation telling you it's in the other set of files. So then when you would go back to a different area and get it.
Any files kept by victims' assistance ministry?
I don't know what files she kept. You'd have to ask Greta Sawyer.
Okay, when a victim or a victim's family member calls in to make a report of sexual abuse to the Archdiocese, is it correct to say that over time and during your tenure as Chancellor, there were certain designated people to take those reports or complaints? Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, they could call the Greta Sawyer's office.
Well, if they just call the Archdiocese, they're usually directed. There's a practice here.
Yeah, and normally those calls would come either to me or to the Vicar General.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
But some people would deliberately call the advocacy office because our website here's the advocacy office phone number. So they might call Greta directly without going through the Vicar General or the Chancellor's office.
So you don't know if Greta keeps separate files or that office keeps separate files?
I don't know what she kept.
Okay.
At some point in time, there was also files, if they were paying bills for a victim, like counseling bills, accounting would have to keep some record of that in some fashion. How they were doing that, I don't know.
There is some indication that there are files kept pertaining to individual victims somewhere by the Archdiocese. Do you know anything about that?
Those, if there existed, I think Greta Sawyer would have them. I don't know. I didn't maintain files on victims.
Is, to your knowledge, anybody in the Archdiocese?
No, not to my knowledge.
There is...
Again, with the exception of these financial things that would need to get paid.
There's some indication somewhere that there are some lists that have been prepared of victims of abuse. Are you aware of such a compilation?
No.
Or its existence?
No.
The list of the accused offenders or those that ultimately were deemed credibly accused, when, to your knowledge, was such a list first compiled by the Archdiocese?
I don't know. I'm not sure a list ever has been prepared, quite frankly.
Well, you're aware that reports were made under the Charter for Protection of Children in 2002 that lists were going to be compiled, and then reports were made to John Jay College of credibly accused offenders, correct?
I know that information was going to be, I've learned that information was submitted to the John Jay study, but as far as I know, it wasn't a list of names. It was numbers of credibly accused priests, and I don't think credibly accused was the word that was actually used by John Jay.
Well, in order to compile the numbers, you have to compile the names, correct?
I don't know how they did it. I wasn't there at the time.
So you had no role in that?
No. Well,
or knowledge of it? Is that what you're saying?
I take that back. I know that when they were compiling that, I received a call from Bill Fallon. I was still in my law firm at the time, and Bill asked me for some information about matters that I had handled as their outside legal counsel. And that's all I can really tell you about it.
Has there been a practice where certain files get moved over to your former law office, now Tom's office, that in anticipation of litigation and they're housed there as opposed to in the Archdiocese?
Only for the limited purpose, for example, of copying them so they could be produced in litigation. His office would get files, make the necessary copies, bait stamp them or whatever else, and then send those files back to us. So there was times, and again, it would depend on the lawsuit. So to give you a prime example of that, you sued out, I think, about 12 to 14 claims on behalf of victims of Thomas Stitz. So we would have directed our archives and records people to get all of the Stitz material together and send that over to Tom's office for, again, photocopying, bait stamping, and then send those back to us at some point in time.
In 1998, the Pioneer Press reported and quoted Father McDonough as saying, there are 15 priests have been credibly accused of molesting minors in the Archdiocese within the last 50 years. Do you know on what he based that public statement?
This was 1998?
Yes.
I don't have a clue.
He also stated publicly and to the reporter as reported that this number is slightly higher than the national average. Do you know on what he based such a statement or anything about that?
I do not.
And counsel, you went over that with Father McDonough, and you are taking much of that out of context. The report says what it says, and this witness obviously didn't have anything to do with it, so I'm not sure its purpose here.
And if I might follow up to your earlier question, counsel.
Well, follow up to which question?
Well, about lists and whether lists existed. I'm also aware that, and I think it was largely in connection with the John Doe 76C case,
Yes.
that in responding to discovery, there was discovery sought relative to the priests that were identified related to the John Jay. So I know I was involved with outside legal counsel to produce that information as part of that litigation.
And in the John Doe 76C, which became publicly the case of Jim Keenan versus the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and the Diocese of Winona, involving Adamson, you did become involved in the compilation of the list for purposes of that litigation? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, we were preparing that in anticipation of litigation. I was mostly a bystander to that because the John Jay list had been prepared before I was at the Chancery, so that was really Father McDonough that was working mostly with Tom Weiser on that.
Have you ever seen a list of priests accused, just priests accused?
Just as part of the discovery. And whatever's been produced here recently, pursuant to Judge Vandenorth's orders.
But before recently, had you ever seen a list?
No.
As Chancellor?
I mean, I had some sense of disciplinary files that were back in the Vicar General's office, but those, again, were a wide array of problems. It could be financial, it could be chemical dependency, whatever. So that didn't necessarily identify them as sexual abusers. And some names, of course, I would recognize. So if Gil Gustafson's file was there, for example, and I can't remember whether it was or not, I would recognize, well, yes, Gil was at one point in time accused, or multiple times, accused of abuse. But other files were there, and I wouldn't recognize who they were or what they were there for.
You quite obviously know that various archbishops take over the archdiocese and have worked with and for Archbishop Roach and Flynn and now Neinstedt. So, in your experience, hasn't anybody ever sat down to prepare a list for any one of the incoming archbishops newly appointed to this geographical area of those priests who have been accused, so that that incoming archbishop, be it Neinstedt, Flynn, can know who it is they have to be aware of?
The only experience I had was when Archbishop Neinstedt came in, and I'm not aware whether anybody prepared a list for him. I never saw a list.
And nobody asked you, as far as you know, asked you to do that, or as far as you know, Archbishop Neinstedt never asked that it be done?
Nobody ever asked me to prepare any kind of list, and I'm not aware of Archbishop Neinstedt asking anybody for such a list.
Did Archbishop Neinstedt ever ask you, given your history, both as the chancellor and your history with this archdiocese, to brief him fully on who the priests were that had been accused of offenses and who may pose a risk of harm?
No, he never asked me for that information.
Do you know if he asked anybody?
Well, I'm aware that in his deposition testimony he...
Well, no, I don't want you to go on his deposition. I'm talking about your personal experience now.
No.
Okay, so let's get the question so
Okay.
we'll get on the same page.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. He said I was in such a meeting with him, and I was not.
Okay, well, I was going to go there, but I want to
Yeah.
find out first.
No, I'm not aware of he ever asking anybody to
Okay.
brief him.
Okay, let me ask the question,
Okay.
and then I'll let you answer.
Okay.
My question is this. To your knowledge, has any official of the Archdiocese, including yourself, at Archbishop Neinstedt's request, or for any reason, ever sat down with him and identified for him who the potential risks are, including those accused of sexual abuse of minors, including those credibly accused of sexual abuse of minors or anything like that, to your knowledge?
Subject to the form, it's multiple, involves all kinds of people other than Mr. Eisenzimmer. I think he can testify to his knowledge.
Let me see if I can respond to it in a responsive manner. I'm not aware of anyone doing that with him, and I'm not aware of him ever requesting that somebody do that with him.
Okay. And then the next question is, because I think you answered it, but I want to get it in question and answer form. Next question is, did Archbishop Neinstedt ever sit down with you shortly after his installation here and ask you to identify for him the potential risks in the Archdiocese of priests sex abusing kids and who had a history? Or anything like that?
No.
What is Archbishop Neinstedt's management style? Is he's been described by a number of folks as very hands-on micromanager type. How do you describe his management style of the Archdiocese?
I wouldn't describe him as a micromanager, nor would I necessarily describe him as hands-on. In his view, he is the Archdiocese. You worked with him largely by written memorandum. If he wanted some information, he would write you a memorandum. You would be expected to respond in memorandum. At least with my work, he largely let me do my work in an unfettered fashion, but he certainly had high expectations for the work I would do for him and that I would keep him briefed. And it was also clear that Archbishop Neinstedt was a guy that you didn't want to hear him say, nobody ever told me that, or you never told me that. So I would always try to keep him abreast of matters of particular importance that he was seeking from me.
Is sexual abuse by the clerics in the Archdiocese one of those matters that he communicated to be of particular importance?
He never identified particular subject matter in that regard. That was really just my working observation of the man.
After litigation involving Adamson, it appeared to me that Archbishop Roach implemented a lot of changes in policy, protocol, and practice, and made some attempts to do a better job. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, no, I don't think it's a fair characterization. The way I think I would describe that is during the period of time that you're talking about, I think that the church was undergoing a fair amount of litigation, and they were trying to use both the litigation as well as other matters involving sexual abuse to learn from, to develop better policies, better responses, and better best practices. And so I think a lot of that stuff began when Archbishop Roach was Archbishop, especially under the direction of Father O'Connell and somewhat Kevin McDonough.
Did Archbishop Flynn make any improvements in practice or protocol when it pertains to sexual abuse and safety that Archbishop Roach hadn't already?
Well, yes. I think Archbishop Flynn had been in Lafayette, Louisiana, which had its own experiences with sexual abuse litigation. He also had been the chairman of the Bishop's Ad Hoc Committee, which became the Committee on Child and Youth Protection.
I know he had titles, but what did he do?
Well, I think that
to improve it.
Ultimately, during his tenure, the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People was passed, so that resulted in doing some work in terms of changing our policies and how we handled abuse. And of course, the Charter adopted the so-called zero tolerance policy, and so those kinds of things were implemented with Archbishop Flynn. And then his tenure also saw the introduction of the Office of Child and Youth Protection efforts, which was educational and training and the like.
Archbishop Neinstadt was obviously quite public about an accusation that had been made against him that got reported and investigated. And that was reported in the newspapers, and you're aware of that?
From what I read in the newspaper, yeah.
Had you, before that got reported in the newspapers, had you received any information from any source that that complaint or that report had been made and known years before?
The complaint against Archbishop Neinstadt?
Yes.
No, not at all.
Were you yourself involved in any of the discussions about whether or not to release the names of the priests accused of sexual abuse of minors? Because that was the subject of a lot of...
At what point in time?
Any time.
Yes, but those would be covered by attorney-client privilege.
Anything in your capacity as chancellor?
Well, in order to articulate the privilege, during the John Doe 76C, there was some discussion, including some discussion and mediation about that question, and I would have advised the Archbishop at that time on the legal status of some of those issues. So let's leave it at that.
So if I ask you questions about that, is it your claim that it's privileged?
Yes, because it's not only within the context of litigation, but it was legal advice.
Why didn't the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis release the list of credibly accused priests until we forced it through public pressure or litigation?
I think that's a question you'll have to direct to the Archbishop. It's his decision what he wants to do with that information.
How many conversations did you have with the Archbishop about whether such a list should be released?
I don't know that I can tell you that. I don't know. More than one.
And what time frame are we talking about?
Well, I think the first conversation would have begun whenever we were litigating a John Doe 76C case, and thereafter up until the time I retired as chancellor.
And that list, when it was first released in the Keenan case, was released to us, but under a protective order by the Archdiocese. It was sealed until more recently. Have any of the officials of the Archdiocese, to your knowledge, advised Archbishop Neinstedt against the position that he took in connection with that list?
Just for the record, that list was sealed pursuant to order of the court.
Yeah, but it was on a protective order from the Archdiocese.
Signed by the court.
Yeah? Agreed.
I'm assuming you're not asking me what my advice to the Archbishop was. I'm not aware of anybody else within the Archdiocese asking him to do something different than what he did. Is that responsive?
I think so.
Okay.
To your knowledge, was there anybody in the Archdiocese, including McDonough or other officials, that were urging it not to be released?
I'm not recalling anybody who expressed an opinion one way or the other. Any discussions that were had reflected the fact that many of the names on that list were already out there in some fashion because of prior publicity on bishop accountability, etc. Other names weren't necessarily known through those means, but there had been some limited disclosure in various communities, especially parish communities, that so-and-so had abused and he was here this period of time. So I think a lot of people were trying to suggest that much of this information was already out there in some way, shape, or form.
Well, are you aware of any effort by the Archdiocese to put that information out there unless it was under pressure from us or as a result of litigation?
Well, yes, as I say, if there was an instance where there's some abuse, Father McDonough or somebody else might go out to a parish and talk to the parish community, or they might have the pastor speak to certain people within the parish community to let them know what a situation was, or they might talk to a parish trustees and do some form of disclosure pursuant to, clergy review board recommendation or somehow. So there was some of those kinds of efforts that were undertaken at various times by people.
You're on the board of the Religious Council, correct?
Well, I've attended the Minnesota Religious Council meetings. I don't know that I don't even know if there's a board. I don't think I'm on the board.
And the Religious Council lobbied heavily against statute of limitations reform, did it not?
There was lobbying efforts made with respect to statutory changes to the statute of limitations involving sexual abuse. I wouldn't say against it. They sought to have a voice in how that statute was crafted over the years.
And the Archdiocese largely funded that effort, did it not?
I don't know how it was funded. It's my understanding that all of the denominations that were involved helped fund it.
The Archbishop has been funding extra payments to various offenders, including Capone and others. What do you know about that?
Well, I know some, and I know some things about that.
Why are offenders getting more money than others?
I don't know that they're getting more money. The canon law requires certain support obligations financially to priests, even those who have committed egregious acts. And so, as far as I know, at various times they've gotten assistance to help them in some way, shape, or form.
How many offenders are getting assistance?
I have no idea what to do.
How many offenders have been getting that kind of assistance, would you estimate, while you were chancellor?
I don't know. I was not involved in that, although I became aware of some of them.
When did you become aware of the fact that they were getting such assistance and getting regular payments?
Well, that would vary depending on who the individual was. Some of them I learned about things being paid to them. Others I didn't learn it until matters involving an accountant who was embezzling came up. Jennifer Hasselberger.
That's Scott Domeyer.
Yeah, and Jennifer Hasselberger also raised some questions about that about the same time, based upon, I think, largely the information that was coming out.
Scott Domeyer raised some objections and some concerns about these payments being made to offenders, did he not?
Not to my knowledge.
To your knowledge, did he raise them to the Archbishop or any
No,
other official?
not that I'm aware of. Nobody ever told me that.
He was the one that was required to, the Archbishop was the one that approves those payments, but he was the one that would ultimately do the financial accounting for it, correct?
First of all, I don't know that the Archbishop approved those. I don't have knowledge of that.
Well, who would have authority to approve such a payments if it wasn't the Archbishop?
I don't know. Perhaps the Vicar General, but that would be up to the Archbishop and the Vicar General what authority he would have in that regard. But it also, and I'm not positive that Mr. Domeyer was the only person that was authorized to cut those checks or make those payments. My guess is certainly if there was a regular payment, they would put that in the accounting system and it would be done pro forma automatically every month or whatever periodic payment was made.
The account is 1-515, under what payments to those who have been accused or determined to have abused children, but they're out of ministry but receiving payments. What do you know about that account and who authorized those payments?
Well, that's a mischaracterization. I think the account was for whatever payments were authorized. I don't know that it was specifically limited to that purpose. It was priest support. That could come in a variety of ways. But I don't really know anything about it other than that every time you expensed something at the Archdiocese, it had to have an account number. You couldn't get a check issued without an account number, so it could be, kept track of by the accountants. So if 1505 was the account, that's what they charged it against.
What do you know about priests being put on disability and qualifying for monthly payments under the diagnosis of pedophilia and that practice in the Archdiocese?
When you say disability, what are you referring to?
Disability for pedophilia and receiving disability payments by an internal insurance company in the Archdiocese.
There's no such person that's ever received money from a disability insurance program within the Archdiocese.
Gil Gustafson.
No, he didn't.
Where did he get the money that he gets paid?
Under his pension plan.
Where did he get the money before he qualified for pension?
I don't know.
Are you aware that there's a disability policy that's been written for him and the diagnosis of that disability is pedophilia?
That's incorrect.
Why was Gustafson put on disability?
He qualified for disability under the pension plan because of the determination by Archbishop Flynn that he was disabled.
And the disability is pedophilia?
Archbishop has the discretion to decide if a priest is disabled. I don't know what thought process he went through to make that determination, but he decided Gil Gustafson was disabled under the pension plan.
And the disability diagnosis was pedophilia, was it not?
No, I don't know that. I don't know. Again, the sole discretion to make that decision rested with Archbishop Flynn, and he made that decision. On what basis he made it is up. You'll have to ask him.
What role did you have in the quinquennial report?
None.
What?
And I might add, thank God.
Who is responsible for the compilation of that data and the reporting, as particularly relating to sexual abuse?
The only person I know that had overall responsibility for that report was Jennifer Hasselberger.
And there's quinquennial reports required before Hasselberger's tenure as Chancellor of Canon Affairs. Who would have been responsible prior to that?
I don't know. I wasn't there long enough to have been there for the previous one. There was a delay there too because of changing them. Because they changed popes. They went from John Paul II to Benedict. I think that the time period got extended beyond the normal 5 years. So there was only one report prepared all the time I was Chancellor, and Jennifer Hasselberger had the overall responsibility for compiling that.
In 2001, the Vatican required under the SST reporting being made directly to them, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
What role did you have in that at all?
None.
And what knowledge do you have of what priests were reported then to the Vatican as having abused minors?
I think there was some communication involving Freddie Montero and but I wouldn't have done that. Jennifer Hasselberger did that. During her tenure, she would have done any of those. And I think that eventually there was something done with Father Waymeyer. Yes, I believe there was something communicated to the CDF involving Waymeyer after he pled guilty.
When you talk about Freddie Montero, that's Francisco Montero that came here from Ecuador as an extern priest, correct?
Correct.
And he lived with McDonough, correct?
I'm told that. I didn't know that of my own knowledge.
Do you know what check was done on him before he was allowed to work as a priest in this archdiocese?
I don't. He was there when I came as Chancellor, I believe. And if he came there after I came as Chancellor, that wasn't my responsibility or function. That was normally the Chancellor for Canonical Affairs that would do those kind of things on external religious priests.
You were aware that Montero was arrested, correct?
Well, I know he was taken into custody. Whether he was actually arrested, I'm not sure.
Well, I think custody and arrest,
Yeah.
let's use synonymous.
Yeah,
Taken
okay.
into
Yes,
custody.
I became aware of that.
Did you discuss that fact with Montero before he was taken into custody or arrested?
No, I never talked to him before then.
You met with him after it, did you not?
We met with him and his attorney at some point in time.
Yes. Did you ask him if he had committed sexual abuse against that child or any others?
The purpose of that meeting was not to interrogate him or ask questions or investigate. It was simply to get us all understanding what was happening with him. And
Are you aware that he,
and I might also add, most of that meeting was conducted in Spanish, which I don't understand. So.
who paid for Montero's lawyer?
I don't know.
Doesn't the Archdiocese have a practice of making arrangements to pay Paul Eng or whoever was representing the accused offender
There have been times
and
where
then paybacks?
there have been times where we've, in essence, lent priests the money so they'd have legal counsel. You know.
And then those
I don't know if
debts-
that was done with Montero or not.
Those debts traditionally get forgiven after the case is over, don't they?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you aware of any that have paid it back?
I know that there are a number of them still paying it back.
Can you give names?
I prefer not to.
Well, we're not here, but nobody prefers to be here today.
Yeah. I'd have to even think about it. I'm trying to remember who Paul Eng's represented over the years. Yeah, I don't. As I sit here, I'm not recalling any names.
Bishop Pates was in on that meeting with Paul Eng and yourself. Why was Bishop Pates there? And then what was the purpose of the meeting?
I don't recall Bishop Pates being at that meeting. I don't think he was.
In a memorandum concerning Montero, there is an expression that the police stated they appreciated that the Archdiocese didn't contact Montero before the police could. Do you remember that exchange between the police and Kevin McDonough?
I don't.
Were you aware generally that the police do not want to have accused offenders contacted by their employers before the police can can interview them?
Sure, and that's why we normally try to coordinate whatever we're doing. In fact, I think our policies reflect that same consideration, our written policies.
Well, that was adhered to in the case of Montero. Why wasn't it adhered to in the case of Waymeyer?
I think it was. I think we, as I've testified here repeatedly today, Deacon Vomastik communicated with the police, telling them exactly what we were doing to give them the opportunity to say, don't do that, if that was their desire.
You make that assertion, but you weren't in that meeting.
Right, I'm only relying on what
so
Deacon Vomastik told me, so if you want to review it with him, I would welcome you to do that.
So
'Cause that's what he told
the totality
me.
of your knowledge and the beliefs and the opinions that you just expressed are based on what Deacon Vomastik told you?
Right, plus the email that I referred to earlier, that there's a copy of an email he sent to Commander Axel, reporting things, and part of that email says we're going to be removing him tomorrow.
Gil Gustafson abused a number of children and was convicted, at least it pertained to one. You're aware of that, correct?
I know that he was convicted. I know that there's been allegations of abuse of others. To the best of my knowledge, Gil Gustafson has denied some of those, so I don't know which ones he's admitted to and which ones he's denied to.
You were aware he was working at the Chancery after having been accused and convicted?
I'm not aware of that. I never saw him working up there. Certainly not during the period of time I worked there.
You've made reference to the testimony of Archbishop Nienstedt and that of McDonough, so evidently you reviewed their depositions before.
I read both of those,
Okay.
yes.
What else did you review in preparation for today?
I looked at the Minnesota Statute 626.556, Minnesota Statute 595.02. I looked at the emails that I mentioned from Deacon Vomastik to the police officer, and I think that included some emails back to Deacon Vomastik. And there was a few other documents, I think, on the Minnesota Public Radio website that I looked at, but I can't recall what those were.
It's a little before 3. Why don't we take a short break?
Okay.
Call the video record.
Mr. Anderson, before you ask your next question, let me supplement my last answer. I think your question was, what did I review prior to this deposition or anticipation of this deposition? I think there was 2 other things that I now recalled reviewing. One was simply a calendar of June 2012, not a calendar with calendar entries, just simply the calendar with the dates and those kinds of things. The other thing I reviewed was, I think in about 2010, the Vatican or the Holy Father issued what they call a motu proprio regarding SST, and so I think I took a glance at that at some point in time. As I see it, I can't even remember why I looked at that, quite frankly.
Well, that was my question. Why did you look at that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
And I'm glad you said SST earlier, because I can't speak the Latin words, sacramentoris or something.
I know. I don't bother anymore. Okay. You're aware that in 2010, the Archdiocese, after prevailing on the statute of limitations in the Supreme Court on John Doe 76C, or the case of Jim Keenan versus the Archdiocese in the Diocese of Winona, that the Archdiocese taxed costs against him, I think, in the amount of $64,000. Did you advise the Archbishop to do that?
Yes.
Why?
Well, again, I think the costs were taxed prior to the Supreme Court decision, I believe.
No, it was after. It was before. But
And obviously, it was a litigation strategy. If he has the risk of paying us $64,000 in costs, maybe he'll decide he doesn't want to appeal the case. So it's purely litigation strategy.
You also think it sends a pretty powerful message to the victims out there how this Archdiocese is going to want to treat them if they have the courage to stand up against them, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know. It wasn't my consideration.
In any case, it was the Archbishop's decision to make, even though you may have advised it.
I don't
know. It was
know.
his decision.
I don't know that he decided. I believe I probably would have communicated with the then Vicar General, whoever that was. I don't know that. I don't think I ever talked to the Archbishop directly about the question.
So, who then is responsible for having made that decision to tax that young man for having stood up against the Archdiocese and then lost on the statute of limitations?
I think I'll fully accept responsibility for that because it was my recommendation.
You did discuss that with the Archbishop, I trust.
No, I don't believe I did. I don't recall that I did.
After that was done and made public, did the Archbishop ever express disapproval of that decision, or make any effort to ameliorate the harm done by it?
Well, no one had required Mr. Keenan to pay any money. So certainly from the financial side, purely financial side, there was no harm done.
They were going to, though.
No, I don't think that's true.
Well, okay. But my question is
I mean,
this.
ultimately, we did not tax costs and probably could have, I think.
No, tax costs were taxed, but then for other legal reasons, it became non-feasible because of his filing of bankruptcy.
Well, whatever.
My question to you, though, is did the Archbishop ever express anything to you about the fact that, well, this isn't the right thing, this is wrong, to win a case on the statute of limitations and then go after the victim the way the Archdiocese did?
The Archbishop never expressed anything one way or the other to me about that.
Do you think it is wrong?
No.
There's been a lot of public discourse by the Archdiocese for years about zero tolerance and caring for the wellness and the safety of the survivors. Do you think that that taxation of that survivor in that instance sends a message that the Archdiocese really cares about their survivor and or their wellness?
Well, I certainly think that some people can get confused about it, and some people chose to mischaracterize the nature of that. But your client had ample opportunity to resolve that case in a fashion that could have settled it and avoided that. And he chose not to take advantage of that, as you know.
His only requirement for settlement of that case was release of the list. That was his first requirement, and there was no economic requirement in front of that list. And he said to this Archdiocese, to every representative at every point in that case, you release the list and I'll talk settlement. And the Archdiocese and the Archbishop refused to release that list, correct?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we're getting into some testimony about settlement discussions.
You started it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well,
but that's correct, isn't it?
It was clear that that was his first item of demand, was the list.
Yes.
Yeah.
And any other discussion was preconditioned upon release of the list and the names, correct?
Well, he certainly wouldn't discuss any other issues without the list.
Okay. Is there a written document retention policy in the Archdiocese?
Like file retention?
Yeah, file retention.
I believe that the archivist or record keeping office has a record retention policy.
And what is it? I mean, when it comes to, let's say, a priest who may have offended, and the files, what would...
Those files are never destroyed, never disposed of in any way, shape, or form. They're kept forever. Okay. Everything in a priest file.
Even if they were found to have not actually offended and were exonerated internally?
Yes, everything is kept in the file. Okay. Nothing's thrown away. Even a greeting card that the priest might sell into the Archbishop could find its way in their file forever.
When did John Shelley first come onto your radar?
Well, I had known Father Shelley for years back when I was in my law firm.
In 2004, when Joe Ternus, T-E-R-N-U-S, turned the computer over to Father McDonough, what, if any, was your involvement at that stage?
None.
And at that time, Richard Setter was hired by the Archdiocese. Did you have any involvement in that decision?
I did not.
And Setter retained a forensic assessor to do a forensic computer assessment of the images, which were thought to have been potentially child pornography. Did you see that report prepared by both Setter and Johnson?
At some point I saw parts of Setter's report and parts, and maybe all of Johnson's report.
In the Johnson report, and in part reflected by the Setter report, it described that the images on that computer were potentially child pornography, were they not?
I think it used the term borderline.
Okay. And when did you first see that report?
Sometime in 2012.
In 2004, you became aware that the computer had been turned over to the Archdiocese, and the consultants hired and an investigation done, correct?
I didn't learn that in 2004.
You learned that when?
It was probably 2012.
Okay. Did you ever see those images?
No.
Shelley was sent to St. Luke's, and Kevin McDonough was involved in that decision on behalf of the Archdiocese. Did you become aware of that?
At some point in time, I became aware that he had been sent to St. Luke, but that was not until like 2012 as well.
In the documents and the deposition of Kevin McDonough, he specifically asked St. Luke's some very limited questions, and he specifically restricts his questions to them instead of giving a broad overview of any dangers or any other sexual history. Specifically asks them to limit their inquiry to two specific questions. In your experience, has that been a common practice known to you, other than that is reflected in the Shelley matter, if it is so reflected?
Object to the form and misstatement of Father McDonough's testimony.
Yeah. I don't know what's reflected in anything related to St. Luke's and Father Shelley, and normally what Father McDonough would communicate to St. Luke or another treatment facility was his determination of what he wanted them to reflect on.
Well, let me just put it this way. The questions he asked of St. Luke's were, one, whether Shelley had a problem with compulsive interest in pornography use, and two, whether he was being honest. And he only wanted answers to those questions in the referral. My question to you is, are you aware of limiting the inquiry of St. Luke's who are doing assessments of possible offenders such as Shelley?
Same objections.
Yeah, and I can't, I'm sorry, I can't say that I knew that that had been done before or hadn't been done before. I don't know.
As it pertains to conversations between yourself and the Archbishop pertaining to childhood sexual abuse and priests possibly offending and the like, during your tenure as Chancellor, Do you make a claim that those conversations or any of them are privileged?
Well, certainly if he was seeking legal advice as to those matters, or if they were matters in litigation where we were discussing legal matters relative to litigation, they might be privileged. But normally, if he was just seeking information or asking questions about, the background of a particular matter, those I wouldn't characterize necessarily as privilege unless it was a predicate for asking my legal advice.
Well, the decision to report, is that seeking legal advice? Is this a reportable offense?
Well, it certainly can be, sure.
Would that be privileged?
Yeah, it can be.
Did he ever seek your advice on whether an offense should be reported?
No.
Did you become aware in the Shelley matter that after he was sent to St. Luke's and they answered the questions that were asked, it was after that the Senate report and findings came back?
Again, that all happened before I became into the Chancellor's office,
Okay.
so I don't know anything about that.
And I think that was shortly before you came into the Chancellor's office. So when
Well, again, you
you
probably
came in 2005.
late 2005, November 7th, 2005.
So when you came in, none of that became known to you immediately? That
Correct.
Shelley had been on the radar, that there had been this problem, and he was still in ministry?
Correct. At some point in time, I learned there was some issue, but initially that was very, very limited in terms of what I learned.
What did you learn at what point in time?
I'm not sure what point in time it was, but a call had come in and been directed to me, and there was a woman, and I recall her saying something about that she was aware that Father Shelley had been somehow involved with sexually explicit materials or something along those lines. I didn't know anything about it, so then I communicated to Father McDonough in some fashion and said, I don't know anything about this. This is what this woman's saying. What do you want to do? And I don't remember what we did after that.
Did you make a memorandum of that call?
I likely did, either a written memorandum, excuse me, or an email if Father McDonough was doing email at the time.
2000. Well, what year would that have been?
Well, it would have been somewhere between the time I started and 2012. I can't pin it down.
McDonough said he wasn't really using email, I think, until later.
And again, I don't know if I would have done it by email. I could have done it by memo. And if so, I'm guessing there should be a copy in Father Shelley's file.
The woman or the caller said that he was involved in sexually explicit material. Was it child pornography?
I don't remember how she characterized it.
Did it alarm you enough to go back to Shelley's file and say, we better look into this, and what's the history of this guy?
No, because Father McDonough would have known that, so that's why I referred the call to him.
And what was McDonough's response to you when you referred the call to him?
As I said, I didn't refer the call to him. I referred the information I'd gotten from this woman to him. I don't recall what his response was. And I may not have even gotten a response from him. I don't know that.
In any case, Shelley continued as he had, which means he was active in ministry, correct?
I think Father Shelley was in a parish at the time this call came in, yeah.
Okay. And that call did not trigger, to your knowledge, McDonough to have done anything different as a result of that had been done before, which means keep Shelley
Right.
ministry.
I mean, what I related to Father McDonough was that this woman didn't have any information of her own knowledge. She was repeating some rumor or something she had heard in the community. She had no direct firsthand knowledge or anything that would be helpful. She was just repeating something in the community.
But you now know that included in the Shelley file was the whole St. Luke's report, the seizing of the taking the possession of the computers, the destruction of the computers, and also that the analysis done showed he'd been in possession of borderline child pornography. You knew all those things?
No, I would not agree with that characterization. First of all, I've never heard anybody suggesting that a computer was destroyed. I mean, the report speaks for itself, I guess. It uses the term borderline, from what I recall, but I would not have looked at or seen the St. Luke material or anything. The only thing I was ever aware of in the St. Luke material, I think, at some point in time in early 2012, Jennifer Hasselberger wrote a memorandum, and I think I've seen that referred to the St. Luke report. That's
Okay.
what I remember.
We'll get to that. In 2008, there's indication that Shelley is reported to have been allowed to have, or was living with an 18-year-old parishioner. Did that come to your attention?
No.
Does that alarm you that he had, given the history you now know?
Well, at some point in time, we even had discussions about the rules around rectories and whether priests should have anybody living in rectories, even family members. So anytime there was questions that came up about somebody living in a rectory, for example, there would be follow-up questions about that. And eventually, I think we actually drafted a policy around that to make sure that people were doing what they were supposed to be doing regarding those things.
To your knowledge, in 2008 or at any time, was any disciplinary action or investigation conducted concerning Shelley responsive to the report you got, or the knowledge in the file that he was living with an 18-year-old?
I wouldn't describe what I got as a report.
Okay, well,
and I think
whatever.
I've already answered that question. Regarding him living with an 18-year-old, I don't know anything about that.
Okay. In 2012, in February, Jennifer Hasselberger found 48 restricted files archived in the Archdiocese that she says were moved to the basement without reference to being in the personnel files. What do you know about that?
Nothing. I mean, I've heard that comment somewhere. I'm not sure where I've heard that comment.
Did you read that memo?
I don't recall that. I mean, I know Jennifer raised a question about some files that were in the basement, and the Chancellor's office is responsible for the files. So Jennifer was questioning, where these things were or where they should be kept, et cetera, et cetera.
So it says 48 restricted files. What are those files?
I don't have a clue what she's talking about.
It's
I
saying-
never understood what she was referring to. As far as I know, we had all the restricted files.
She also found a banker's box of 3-ring binders, including the Setter report, and the findings that were made in 2004. Were you aware that there was a 3-ring binder in there, in the Shelley file, including the Setter report?
Well, I ultimately saw parts of the Setter report. Anytime Setter did an investigation, he prepared a 3-ring binder. So for any investigation that was undertaken by Richard Setter, there should be a 3-ring binder somewhere in the Chancery with the priest file or referenced in some fashion that the archives and records people can retrieve it. How they set up those files, they decide that. That's why we have an archives, or have an archives and records department.
There's also DVDs. You know anything about those that she references?
Well, Mr. Turnus, is my understanding, had copied material from the computer hard drive of the computer that he said was Father Shelley's on a DVD, or somebody had. I don't know who.
No, these are the ones found by Jennifer Hasselberger before Turnus went back.
Turnus was the guy who gave the stuff to the Archdiocese to begin with.
Okay, excuse me, go ahead.
So either Mr. Turnus or somebody else had copied the material on the hard drive onto some DVDs. I've never seen them. I never saw them. But what I've heard described is those DVDs were in the file.
And do you know what happened to the computer or the hard drive?
Other than what I've heard Father McDonough testify that he doesn't, I think, know what happened to the hard drive.